Drop a comment with your location and time. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Free support? Hit subscribe and like. It exists in the deepest, coldest layer of a forgotten government server. A single, corrupted data packet. It has no name, no date, no authorization code. Officially, it's a ghost byte, a meaningless error in a sea of archived code. But if you know how to listen, really listen, it whispers a story. The story of an operation so secret, so sensitive, that the final step of the mission was to erase the mission itself. Not just from the records, but from memory, from the very digital fabric of history. Tonight, we're not just opening a classified file. We're chasing a digital phantom down a rabbit hole it was never meant to escape. This is the story of the operation that was erased. The operation's conclusion was not marked by debriefings or medals, but by a chilling silent mechanism known as the Redaction Protocol. This wasn't a simple act of classifying documents. It was an exercise in ontological warfare, a systematic effort to unwrite history itself. The protocol was initiated by a single encrypted command, cascading through secure networks and activating specialized teams known as the Janitors. Their mission was not to clean up a mess, but to erase the very concept that a mess had ever been made. The protocol operated on 4 distinct levels of sanitization. Level 1 was purely digital, a surgical strike. Sophisticated algorithms, nicknamed Reapers, crawled through every allied database, server, and backup archive on the planet. They didn't just delete files related to the operation. They hunted for metadata, for stray references, for the digital ghost of a single keyword. They sought out and destroyed the shadow of the information, leaving behind corrupted data blocks that would appear as simple hardware failures. Level 2 was brutally physical. The Janitors, working in undisclosed locations, oversaw the high-temperature incineration of every piece of paper, every hard drive, every physical artifact associated with the mission. Blueprints, personnel files, requisition forms, all were turned to sterile ash, their destruction logged by a separate, self-deleting system. Level 3 was the most insidious, targeting the human element. Every individual involved, from the operators on the ground to the analysts in windowless rooms, was subject to a cognitive reset. This didn't involve futuristic memory-wiping technology, but something far more practical and terrifying. Forced transfers, doctored psychological evaluations, and the strategic introduction of new, fabricated memories through carefully orchestrated assignments and falsified personal histories. Their service records were rewritten, their involvement becoming a bland, uneventful period of administrative leave or a posting to a quiet, forgotten embassy. Finally, Level 4 was the grand deception. This stage involved retroactively altering public and semi-public records entirely unrelated to the operation, creating a world where the necessary preconditions for the mission could never have logically existed. Shipping manifests were altered, geological surveys were faked, and political timelines were subtly adjusted. The goal was absolute. If a researcher in the future somehow stumbled upon a clue, the surrounding historical context would aggressively refute its existence. The Redaction Protocol was designed to create a perfect, impenetrable void, ensuring the operation didn't just become a secret, but an impossibility. A perfect void, however, is a theoretical concept. Reality is messy, and even the most thorough erasure can leave behind faint, almost imperceptible echoes. The architects of the Redaction Protocol understood this. They knew that stray signals, captured by unaffiliated listening posts or buried in deep storage archives they couldn't access, might survive the digital purge. Their solution was to flood the airwaves with noise, to create a blizzard of disinformation so dense that any genuine signal ghost would be lost within it. But for a small, dedicated group of former signals intelligence analysts, now working in the private sector, this static was not a deterrent. It was a challenge. They called themselves the Echo Hunters. For years, they sifted through terabytes of archived raw signal data from the period, looking for patterns the Reapers might have missed. They found them. Not clear messages, but fragments. Bursts of encrypted data lasting mere milliseconds, too short to be considered a threat by the automated cleanup protocols. Within these fragments, recurring alphanumeric strings began to appear. They were code names, floating in the digital abyss, without context or affiliation. Nightshade, Argus 4, the Glassmaker, Station Echo 7. These were the ghosts in the machine. The Echo Hunters cross-referenced these names against every known database, every declassified file, every conspiracy forum on the web. The results were maddeningly inconclusive. Nightshade appeared once in the margins of a logistics report for an agricultural project in South America. Station Echo 7 was briefly mentioned in a garbled transmission from a defunct Arctic weather station. The Glassmaker was a whisper, a name uttered by a defecting diplomat who was assassinated before he could be fully debriefed. Each clue was a dead end, a breadcrumb leading off a cliff. The analysts realized they were dealing with a deliberately constructed labyrinth. The codenames were not just identifiers. They were part of a hidden lexicon, a language for an operation that officially never was. The static wasn't just there to hide the signal. It was part of the signal itself, a complex layer of cryptographic noise. Cracking the meaning of these names, they believed, wouldn't just reveal what the operation was about. It would be the first step in proving it had happened at all. While the Echo Hunters chased ghosts in the static, a different kind of anomaly was being tracked in the physical world. A freelance geospatial intelligence analyst named Elias Vance, a man who had made a career out of finding things on maps that weren't supposed to be there, was conducting a longitudinal survey of desolate regions using subscription-based satellite imagery. He was looking for evidence of undeclared resource extraction, but he found something far stranger. In a vast, windswept plateau, in a notoriously remote and politically neutral territory, a place cartographers had long dismissed as empty, a structure had appeared. Comparing archival imagery from a decade prior with current high-resolution scans, Vance saw that something had been built where nothing should be. It wasn't on any official map, not military, not civilian, not geological. It was a geographical black hole. The facility, which he unofficially dubbed the blind spot, was a marvel of covert construction. There were no access roads visible from orbit, no nearby airfields. The structure seemed to have simply materialized. Its architecture was brutally functional and deeply unsettling. A central windowless monolith was surrounded by a series of smaller, identical black cubes, all connected by what appeared to be subterranean tunnels, indicated by faint heat signatures on thermal imaging. The perimeter was not a fence, but a perfectly circular scar on the Earth, several kilometers in diameter, suggesting the use of unconventional energy or geological disruption technology. There was no sign of life, no movement of vehicles or personnel. Yet the facility was clearly active. Nightly thermal scans showed a constant, low-level energy output from the central building, a hum of activity completely sealed off from the outside world. Vance ran the coordinates through every restricted database he could access through back channels. The results were always the same. No data. Location unassigned. This was a true black site, a place so secret it had been scrubbed from the very grid of the Earth. The blind spot was the physical anchor to the digital mystery. The code names in the static now had a potential destination. This was where the operation was born, or where it was buried. It was a concrete tombstone for a ghost, a silent, menacing testament to the existence of the operation erased from all logs. A black site like the blind spot requires a unique kind of inhabitant. You cannot staff such a facility with conventional soldiers or intelligence officers. Their paper trails are too long, their connections to the outside world too numerous. To operate in a place that doesn't exist, you need people who don't exist either. This was the principle behind the assembly of the Phantom Cell. The recruitment process was a masterpiece of clandestine human resources. The operations handler, a shadowy figure known only as the director, didn't post job openings. He hunted for ghosts. He sought out individuals who were officially dead, disgraced, or disappeared, but who possessed hyper-specific, elite skills. The candidates were plucked from the fringes of society. There was the cryptographer, a woman who had supposedly perished in a mountaineering accident years earlier, but had in fact been living under deep cover. There was the field medic, a former Special Forces surgeon court-martialed on trumped-up charges to discredit him before he could expose a different illegal program. They found a remote viewing specialist, a psychologist, whose pioneering work in weaponized memetics had seen him professionally ruined and institutionalized. Each recruit was an island, isolated and deniable. Before being brought in, their remaining histories were meticulously sanitized. Any lingering records, dental, financial, social, were permanently corrupted or deleted. They were given new identities, but not for use in the outside world. These were internal designations, the code names that would later surface in the static. They were no longer people. They were assets, tools honed for a single purpose. The psychological toll of this erasure was immense. These individuals were asked to sever every tie to their past, to become utterly untethered from their own lives. They were motivated by different things: a chance at redemption, a misplaced sense of patriotism, or in some cases, a simple lack of any other choice. They were flown to the blind spot on unmarked, high-altitude aircraft, traveling in complete sensory deprivation. They never saw their handlers' faces. They didn't meet their fellow cell members until they were all sealed inside the sterile, windowless environment of the site. They were a team of phantoms, assembled in a ghost facility, preparing to execute an operation that, once completed, would be surgically removed from reality itself. The dossier called him Prometheus, a high-value asset, a linchpin in a network that threatened to destabilize 3 continents. The file was thick with grainy satellite photos, intercepted communiques, and psychological profiles that painted him as a cunning ideologue with a global reach. For 72 hours, the team, code-named Echo 7, had maintained overlapping surveillance from 3 separate positions in the rain-slicked, anonymous city. They tracked his movements from a third-floor apartment to a local cafe, to a nondescript office building. They listened to his calls, cataloged his visitors, and analyzed his digital footprint. The problem was, the man on the ground didn't match the monster in the file. Prometheus, according to the dossier, was a ghost who moved through shadows. The man they watched, a certain Mr. Alistair Finch, was painfully, almost aggressively, mundane. He bought the same newspaper every morning. He fed pigeons in the park. His phone calls were to his aging mother and a local veterinarian about his cat. There were no coded phrases, no dead drops, no clandestine meetings. The team's SIGINT specialist, call sign Oracle, ran deep-level diagnostics on Finch's entire digital existence. It was flawless. Too flawless. His records were a perfect tapestry of an unremarkable life, woven so tightly, there were no loose threads, no inconsistencies, not even a single late utility payment. It felt synthetic, like a digital prop placed on a stage. The team leader, Spectre, felt a cold dread creeping in. This wasn't an intelligence failure. This was something else. The target profile was a masterful work of fiction. They weren't watching a man. They were watching a story, a carefully constructed narrative designed to hold their attention. The real question was why? Were they a diversion? Was the real operation happening somewhere else while they were occupied babysitting a phantom? Or was the deception aimed inward? The feeling of being watched themselves became palpable. The observation posts, once secure havens, now felt like glass enclosures. Every encrypted burst they sent back to command felt like they were feeding a machine that was, in turn, analyzing them. They were observing a target that never was, a hollow man. And in doing so, they had become the sole focus of an unseen audience. The mission clock ticked past the 96-hour mark, entering the final phase. Standard operating procedure dictated a final confirmation from command, a green light transmission on a hyper-encrypted channel, scheduled for precisely 200 hours. The team gathered in their primary observation post, a soundproofed room smelling of stale coffee and ozone from the electronics. The air was thick with unspoken tension. At Aeroum 59, Oracle had his fingers poised over the console, the receiver tuned to the designated frequency. The digital waterfall display was stable. Aero 200 came and went. Nothing. Not a squawk, not a burst of static, not a failed handshake protocol, just pure, absolute silence. Spectre waited, his face a granite mask. Delays were possible, if rare. Cosmic interference, solar flares, a compromised satellite relay. They ran through the protocols. They switched to the backup frequency. Silence. They initiated the tertiary failsafe, a quantum-entangled communicator that was, in theory, instantaneous and infallible. The indicator light remained a dead, hollow black. The silence wasn't an absence of signal. It felt like a presence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket deliberately thrown over them. For the next 48 hours, they were an island, completely severed from the world they served. Every attempt to re-establish contact was met with the same profound void. They were operating blind, armed with their last directive: execute the mission if the final abort window passed without a counterorder. The psychological pressure began to warp their reality. The mundane man, Finch, continued his routine outside, oblivious, his every predictable action a mockery of their situation. Was the communication blackout part of the test? A final, brutal examination of their resolve? Or had something gone catastrophically wrong back home? Had command ceased to exist? Paranoia began to fester. The team members exchanged wary glances, Every shadow in the room seemed to deepen. Every hum of the equipment sounded like a countdown. They were trained for isolation, but this was different. This was excision. They had been surgically removed from the chain of command, left with a single, deeply flawed order, and the crushing weight of a silence that screamed. They were utterly, terrifyingly alone. 0 hour was set for AO400 on the 5th day. With less than an hour to go, the silence from command had become their de facto order. The final abort window had closed 6 hours prior. According to the mission parameters they had memorized until they were etched into their subconscious, inaction was not an option. The directive was clear. In the event of total communications failure, standing orders are to be executed without deviation. Spectre stood before a cracked window, gazing down at the quiet street where their phantom target slept. The dossier said Finch was a threat. His gut, honed by 2 decades of clandestine warfare, screamed that he was a pawn. The 2 truths tore at him. His team looked to him, their faces pale in the glow of the monitors. Oracle had his hand on the trigger for the cyber warfare package. Wraith, their infiltration specialist, had a single untraceable syringe of a fast-acting neurotoxin. The plan was clean, silent, and absolute, but it felt fundamentally wrong. "This is a ghost hunt," Wraith whispered, breaking the tense quiet. "We all feel it. The intelligence is fabricated. We proceed, we're sanitizing a loose end, but it's not him. It might be us." Spectre didn't respond. He reread the final line of the directive in his mind. Without deviation. Was that an order or a cage? Was this operation a test of loyalty, forcing them to choose between protocol and conscience? Or was it simpler and far more sinister? Were they being directed to commit an atrocity that would then be used to disavow them, to erase them as rogue agents? The final 15 minutes stretched into an eternity. Every tick of the clock was a hammer blow. He thought of the faces of his team, the implicit trust they placed in his judgment. Following the order might be a betrayal of that trust. Defying it would brand them as traitors, hunted by the very apparatus that created them. There was no right answer, only different paths to destruction. At 0359, with 60 seconds left on the clock, Spectre turned from the window. He looked at each member of Echo 7, his gaze lingering for a moment. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a signal of conviction or certainty. It was an act of resignation, a final surrender to the machine that had set them on this path. The moment of execution had arrived. At precisely 0400, the operation was executed. It was not loud, not explosive. It was a quiet, sterile series of actions completed with chilling efficiency. Wraith moved through the shadows of Finch's building, a ghost in the machine. Oracle unleashed his digital payload, a surgical strike that would cripple the target's minimal network infrastructure. Not that there was much to cripple. The entire event, from breach to exit, lasted less than 4 minutes. It was anticlimactic, the air heavy with the feeling of a profound mistake. But the true operation, they would soon realize, began at 0405. As the team regrouped at their rally point, the erasure protocol initiated. It started with Oracle's console. The mission data, the surveillance logs, the terabytes of intel they had gathered. It didn't just delete. It began to actively write over itself with corrupted, meaningless code, the screen dissolving into a cascade of glitching symbols. "I'm not doing this," Oracle stated, his hands raised from the keyboard. It's a worm. From command side. It's eating everything. Then their personal encrypted communicators buzzed once in unison and died, the screens going permanently black. The GPS trackers in their gear, embedded in their boots and utility belts, blinked out one by one on their tactical map, leaving a void where they stood. The satellite overhead, their eye in the sky, retasked itself, its camera feed pivoting to a barren stretch of ocean 1,000 miles away. They were being unplugged from the system in real time. Spectre accessed a dead man's switch, a deeply buried back door into the agency's personnel servers. He keyed in his own identification number. The result came back in a fraction of a second. Query not found. He tried Wraith. Oracle. The same result. According to the digital archives of the organization they had dedicated their lives to, Echo 7 did not exist. They had never existed. The safe house they were in was already being listed as vacant on local real estate servers. The rental vehicles they had used were being reported as stolen from a different city. Every breadcrumb, every trace of their existence over the past week was being systematically, ruthlessly, and efficiently scrubbed. They finally understood. Finch wasn't the target. The silence wasn't a test. The operation was a lie. They were the target. This was 0 hour, and they were the zero record. Deep beneath the Utah salt flats, in a chamber shielded by 20 feet of reinforced concrete and lead, the final protocol was initiated. This was Site Omega, a facility that didn't appear on any map, built for a single terminal purpose. The air was cold, recycled, and utterly silent, save for the low hum of life support and the rhythmic blinking of a single red terminal. 2 individuals, known only as Proctor 1 and Proctor 2, stood before the console. They were the last custodians of Project Nightingale, and their task was to ensure it would never have existed. The activation of the blank slate protocol was not a simple switch. It was a meticulous, synchronized ritual. They produced 2 distinct cryptographic keys, physical devices that had never been in the same room until this moment. One was retrieved from a vault in the Arctic, the other from a decommissioned submarine at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. They inserted them into their respective slots. The central screen, previously dark, illuminated with a cascade of authentication challenges. It was a digital conversation with a ghost, a series of call and response queries that verified their identities, their biometrics, and their psychological stability. The system needed to know its executioners were sane and acting under no duress. For 10 agonizing minutes, they answered. Retinal scans, voice pattern analysis, pressure-sensitive palm prints, and finally a sequence of alphanumeric codes recited from memory. Codes they had been trained for years to remember under any circumstance. With the final verification complete, a new prompt appeared. It was stark, simple, and devoid of any warning. Execute blank slate? Proctor 1 looked at Proctor 2. No words were exchanged. A lifetime of training, of living in the shadows for this one moment, had stripped them of the need for them. They reached out simultaneously, their fingers hovering over the Y on their respective keyboards. They pressed down. The terminal flashed green for a single blinding second, and then went completely dark. The hum of the servers in the adjoining hall ceased. An absolute, profound silence fell over Site Omega. The blank slate was active, the self-devouring serpent had been released, and its first meal was its own tail. The moment the blank slate protocol went live, the process of erasure began with its most critical components. the proctors themselves. As the silence in Site Omega deepened, Proctor 1's wrist-mounted biometric device went inert. A small red light that had been green for his entire tenure simply switched off. He was no longer recognized by the facility he commanded. When Proctor 2 attempted to access a local terminal to confirm the cascade's progress, the screen returned a single message: access denied, user unknown. They were already becoming ghosts. Their task was complete, and the system they had unleashed was now methodically excising them from its reality. They were not permitted to witness the full scope of the digital annihilation they had started. A silent security detail, men with no insignia and faces trained to convey nothing, entered the control room. These were not the site's regular guards. They were a different entity entirely, a cleanup crew for the cleaners. The proctors were escorted out through a series of blast doors they had never used before, into a transport vehicle with blacked-out windows. They were handed a simple manila envelope. Inside was a passport with a new name, a small amount of cash, and a one-way ticket to a city they had never heard of. Their service records, their commendations, their entire existence within the intelligence community, all of it was being overwritten with digital noise by the very program they had activated. They were warned, not with threats, but with a calm, chilling statement. The person you were is a closed chapter. There is nothing to go back to. There is no one to talk to. Any attempt to look back will find only static. They were the living embodiment of the operation's central paradox. To completely erase an event, you must also erase the memory of the event. And that included the memories held by its architects. They were now civilians, adrift in a world that had no record of their sacrifices, haunted by the knowledge of a vast, dark secret that they could never share, for which no proof would ever exist again. The Blank Slate Protocol was not a deletion program. It was a digital incinerator. Codenamed Cerberus, the core of the protocol was a self-replicating multi-stage cyber weapon designed for scorched earth data warfare. Once activated in the isolated network of Site Omega, its first action was to destroy its own origin point, overwriting the servers that housed it with 17 layers of cryptographic gibberish, a digital analog to burning a letter, and then scattering the ashes in a hurricane. Then, it began to hunt. Cerberus didn't travel through the public internet. It moved through a network of covert hardwired backdoors and proprietary satellite links embedded deep within global telecommunications infrastructure during the Cold War. Digital sleeper agents waiting for a single command. Its targets were specific. Every server, every database, every backup tape, and every file, no matter how deeply archived, that was watermarked with the unique cryptographic signature of Project Nightingale. When Cerberus found a target, its process was brutally efficient. Stage 1 flooded the system with junk data, consuming all processing power and memory. Stage 2 was the overwrite, using the Gutmann method on every single file, making forensic recovery a theoretical impossibility. Stage 3 was the most insidious. It would then attack the hardware itself, flashing the firmware of hard drives, network cards, and even motherboards with corrupted code, effectively bricking the device and turning multi-million-dollar data centers into rooms of useless metal. In the most secure locations, where physical backups were kept in shielded vaults, Cerberus had a final terrifying capability. It could trigger embedded hardware kill switches. Concealed thermite charges attached to server racks would ignite, melting the platters of hard drives into slag. Small, localized EMP emitters would pulse, wiping magnetic tapes clean in a flash of unseen energy. For 72 hours, a silent, invisible firestorm raged through the world's most secret digital archives. Data wasn't just deleted, it was annihilated, its physical form rendered as inert and meaningless as the information it once held. After the 72-hour burn was complete, Cerberus executed its final command: self-termination. Its code fragmented, dissolving into the background noise of the internet. The operation was over. The slate was, by all accounts, blank. But in the weeks and months that followed, anomalies began to surface. They were subtle, easily dismissed as standard glitches in a complex global network. But to a select few network analysts and data forensics experts, they formed a disturbing pattern. In the London Stock Exchange, a high-frequency trading algorithm would halt for precisely 3.3 milliseconds every Tuesday morning, for no discernible reason. In Tokyo, the National Archives climate control system would occasionally log temperature fluctuations in a server room that had been decommissioned and empty for years. These were the first echoes. More unsettling were the ghost packets. Packets of data, perfectly formed but containing only randomized noise, would appear on secure military networks. They had no origin and no destination. They would simply exist for a fraction of a second before vanishing. When analyzed, the noise within them carried the faint, residual signature of the Cerberus overwrite algorithm. It was like finding a single mutated cell left over from a cured disease. A small clandestine group of digital archaeologists communicating on encrypted channels began calling it the Static Singularity. They hypothesized that you cannot destroy information on such a massive scale without creating a void, and that the universe, digital or otherwise, abhors a vacuum. The blank slate protocol hadn't just erased Project Nightingale. It had punched a hole in the fabric of the world's data structure. And now, the structure was healing, scarring over, leaving behind faint traces of the wound. The operation was gone, erased from every log and every server. But its ghost remained, a silent, persistent hum in the machine, a testament to the fact that nothing, once it has existed, can ever truly be made to disappear completely. The digital ghosts of Operation Nocturne were one thing. The human phantoms were another entirely. If the mission required absolute secrecy, it demanded personnel who were, for all intents and purposes, already ghosts. My investigation turned from server logs and encrypted signals to the far murkier world of human resources, or rather the complete absence of it. There were no service records, no payroll stubs, no pension files. The operators of Nocturne were never born, and they never died. They simply occupied a space between the lines of official history. I began searching for anomalies in recruitment patterns from clandestine services during the estimated time frame of the operation. I was looking for a specific profile: individuals with high aptitudes, but no traceable past; orphans, foreign nationals without documentation, individuals declared dead in accidents. These were the raw materials for what one fragmented memo referred to as zeroed assets. A zeroed asset was a person whose identity had been systematically dismantled before they were even brought into the fold. Every photograph, school record, and personal connection was scrubbed, not by a simple deletion, but by a meticulous process of replacement and obfuscation. They were made into blank slates, their only identity being the mission itself. This wasn't just about creating spies. It was about forging instruments of a policy so sensitive that even the instrument had to be deniable. The psychological toll is unimaginable. To exist without a past, to know that no one mourns you because no one remembers you, creates a unique kind of soldier, one with nothing to lose and no one to betray. My breakthrough came from a place I least expected: a financial audit of a defunct logistics contractor that once serviced remote listening posts. Buried in a subledger, protected by an obsolete encryption key, was a single recurring payment. It wasn't in dollars, but coded as a complex alphanumeric string, paid out to a non-existent account. It was a salary for a ghost. The only proof that one of these men, these specters of the state, had ever drawn a breath. Erasing an operation of this magnitude isn't like deleting a file. It's like removing a mountain from a landscape. The hole it leaves behind is a landmark in itself. To understand this, I sought out a man known only by the handle Cassandra, a data archaeologist who had retired off-grid after witnessing the birth of the surveillance state. We met in a secure chat room, his text appearing in stark, monospaced font. He told me that the very fabric of the early global network bears a wound from the time of Operation Nocturne. He called it the Great Anomaly, or the Silent Region. He explained that the brute force method of wiping terabytes of data across countless secure systems simultaneously would have been impossible without detection. The method used for Nocturne was different. It was surgical, yet catastrophic. It didn't just delete. It created a void, a region of the network's foundational architecture, where the normal laws of data physics no longer apply. Cassandra sent me a visualization he had compiled over years of observation. It showed a map of global data traffic, but in one specific sector of the deep web, there was a dark, pulsating void. Data packets that entered this region would either vanish or become so corrupted their information was rendered as pure noise. He described it as a scar, a place where the network's memory of a traumatic event still lingered. Algorithms designed to route traffic would instinctively steer clear of it, like animals avoiding a cursed place. This wasn't just dead space on a server. It was a fundamental flaw etched into the protocol stack, a lingering echo of the erasure tool. Cassandra theorized the tool wasn't software as we know it, but a weaponized algorithm that attacked the concept of information itself. It targeted data, metadata, and the very existence of the records, creating a paradox that the network couldn't resolve. The scar was the system's ongoing attempt to heal from a wound it couldn't remember receiving. It was the most concrete piece of evidence I had found, a gaping hole where something used to be. The deeper I descended into the rabbit hole of Operation Nocturne, the more I realized its erasure had consequences that bled from the digital world into the physical. If you remove a key event from history, the timeline doesn't just heal over. It scars in weird, illogical ways. I started hunting for these scars, these paradoxes in the public record. I found a story from a small-town newspaper in 1987 detailing the groundbreaking of a major geological research facility in the nearby desert. There were photos of politicians in hard hats, quotes from lead scientists. The project was real. Yet, according to all federal and state records today, That facility was never built. The land remains untouched. The newspaper archives are the only proof it was ever conceived. It's a historical paradox, an event with a documented beginning, but no middle or end. Then there was the case of a mid-level diplomat who, in the spring of 1991, was a rising star in Eastern European affairs. He was everywhere: news articles, policy papers, television interviews. Then, in May of that year, he simply vanishes. Not just from public life, but from the record itself. Articles that once featured him now have his name replaced with a subordinate's, or the quotes are attributed to a senior official. Photographs have been subtly cropped. He wasn't assassinated or disgraced. He was retroactively edited out of existence. These weren't isolated incidents. I found dozens of them. Phantom corporations, ghost patents for impossible technologies, statistical anomalies in census data that statisticians still can't explain. Operation Nocturne wasn't just about information control. It was an attempt to prune a branch of reality. But the act of pruning left splinters, logical inconsistencies that defy explanation. Our history, our collective memory, is built upon a foundation that is missing a cornerstone. And these paradoxes are the cracks spreading from that empty space. We are living in the aftershock of an event that officially never happened. The network scar, the digital wound left by Nocturne, had an epicenter. By tracing the ghost signals and the erratic data packet behavior, Cassandra was able to triangulate their point of origin. A decommissioned signals intelligence bunker, designated Site Kilo, deep beneath the Utah salt flats. Gaining access was a nightmare of navigating Cold War-era bureaucracy and calling in favors I never knew I had. The facility was a tomb. Dust-caked server racks stood in silent, cavernous rooms, their power supplies severed decades ago. But in the central control room, one terminal was still alive. It wasn't connected to any external network and seemed to be running on a closed-loop power source that hummed with a faint, unnerving energy. On its monochrome screen was a single directory containing a single file. The file name was an unpronounceable string of alphanumeric characters, and its size was listed as an error, a negative integer. The file was a digital black hole. It resisted every command. It could not be copied, moved, or analyzed. Any diagnostic tool I ran against it would immediately crash the system. It was less a file and more a fortress, a piece of data that actively defended itself. Taped to the side of the terminal was a yellowed, handwritten note left by the last technician to ever work in this room. The ink was faded, the handwriting shaky. It read, "Don't try to open it. Don't try to delete it. It remembers what was taken." In that moment, the chilling truth became clear. This wasn't a remnant of the operation's data. This was the weapon, the erasure tool itself. And trapped within its corrupted paradoxical code was the ghost of everything it had been forced to consume. It was a prison holding the memory of Operation Nocturne. I was faced with an impossible choice: to walk away and let the secret remain buried, or to attempt a final, desperate protocol to force it open, and risk unleashing the very history that a shadow government had gone to such impossible lengths to erase.